Xirtus.
Excuse me, I think I'm lost. Is this the Wartburg Research Lab or Club Fed?
Your name, please?
This doesn't much look like it does.
With all the talk about aliens these days, it's high time for a handbook of alien abductees and would-be abductees. Joe Tripician is the author of the official Alien Abductee Handbook, How to Recover from Alien Abduction Without Hypnotherapy, Crystals, or CIA Surveillance. Joe, thanks for being with us.
Oh, thank you.
All right, I've got a big question. This newsroom here, is this an alien spacecraft or not?
In size it resembles one, but you know, the equipment is a lot more recessed in the alien spaceship, but there is a similarity that the employees of MSNBC have that same glazed look in their eyes.
Oh, now that's not nice to say, Joe.
Well, it's mind control.
Have you been abducted?
No, you know, I've never even seen a UFO. I've never been a member of the UFO cult, but I do know what it's like to be a member of a cult because I was married for 13 years, so I know a little bit about mind control.
I'm about to throw the book at you.
Well, I think the reason why we separate art from other kinds of thinking, artistic thinking or artistic expression from other kinds of expression, may be that we just don't understand what communication is. In everyday life, we don't have good theories of how the mind works.
In the Man and Dolphin book.
Well, that was my first book. I've never used it since.
Ah, so you think that's an inadequate concept now?
Right.
Why?
Well, it's much more serious than that, and I don't like to reduce it to two words. It's a continuing difficulty between the humans and other species.
I was so fascinated with nuclear physics that I decided to build an atom smasher. In my mom's garage, I built a 2.3 million electron volt, 6 kilowatt Betatron in the garage. It consumed so much power that every time I turned on my atom smasher, I would blow out every single circuit breaker in the house. When all the lights went out, my mom would just shake her head and say, "Why couldn't I have a son who plays baseball?"
So I'm sitting here focusing on my Teilhard-Chardinian Jesuit doctrines of bio-Trump-Leninism and the divine milieu and whatever, feeling yoked by the omega point, trying to reach my true potential of self, you know, minding my own business, when all of a sudden this Joe Tripician guy emerges from the Ethernet and starts to peruse my Tartaria. And so I've been looking into this guy. I'm like, who is this guy and what's his deal? And he's like, written the Alien Abductee Handbook. You interviewed Captain Crunch, the phone freaker, which is like one of my huge passions.
In Charlie 1, my first computer.
Where is he?
Charlie 1 now is in the possession of Bell Labs in New Jersey because they seem to think that I've used this computer to make a free call. People are not aware of the fact that these things exist. And it's kind of a bummer.
You've done, I've seen over the years, like the Conspiracy of Silence documentary, and also your association with Henson. I mean, that's crazy. Like, that's, yeah. And then seeing the videos you did with Steve Buscemi and Robert Anton Wilson. Like,
I feel life doesn't have boundaries. You don't know from one day to the next whether you're living in a soap opera or an occult thriller or a science fiction novel or a detective story.
Like, my God. And we've been trying to track down any records we can of the American Mayhem show, because you had the show in New Jersey that like just sounds amazing. It sounds crazy. And
I did that in high school, so I don't know how crazy it would be to watch it today.
Usually the craziest stuff, I remember being in high school being like, God, I hope that never gets out. So you're probably lucky, because it probably was.
I could tell you one story about that. We had a comedy troupe. It was me and two other friends from high school, and we called ourselves the Absolute Mania. And what we were doing was these little shows on these cable, channels there, public access. And we did some skits and stuff. And we just got, at a certain point, we got so tired of the content that surrounded the skits that we did, because that was like, we were really like a sore thumb sticking out, or a golden plum if you liked the humor. And so we did this a skit. I was a little reluctant to do it, but my friend Bob kept pushing me. Come on, let's do it. Okay, so I was the announcer. We had a whole stage was black. We had a spotlight come on, and we see a guy from this back. You don't see his face yet, and he's holding a guitar. And I say, ladies and gentlemen, Johnny Cash. And then he turns around and he's standing like this, his eyes half closed with a needle in his arm. Say, thank you, Johnny. And end the scene. We got kicked off for doing that for some reason.
Lift me out of Earth's velocity. The aliens have shown me in their spacecraft as they hold me. Their space age Ozark moonshine recipe.
Jeff Buckley. So Jeff Buckley. So what happened with that, and how did you end up making this?
That's such a great story. I love this story. So my friend Fred Reed, a great musician and composer, he was a sound engineer for a nightclub in New York where Jeff Buckley played. They got to be very friendly, and so I was renting out part of my apartment in New York to Fred as a sound studio. And I was at that time had just finished writing, I think the first draft of my Alien book. I got a publisher already, and it was going to be published in April or May, which was about 5 or 6 months right at the time that I met Jeff. Anyway, so Fred says to me, Jeff Buckley's going to come up and meet him, and I said, well, that's great. I don't know much about him, but I'm looking forward to meeting him. So Jeff came up, and it looked like he was been up all night, but he was such a friendly guy, and was just really interested when I told him about the Alien book about it, and he just got such a kick out of that. Oh, Alien! Oh, that sounds fantastic. And I said, yeah. And then Fred said, okay, well, come check out the studio. So they went to his studio, and then I heard them playing some instruments, and then I heard this mandolin playing, and I came in and I said, is that you playing, Fred? And he says, no, it's Jeff's playing. I said, it sounds really fantastic. And Jeff says, yeah, I've never played a mandolin before in my life. He picked it up and he started playing it as if he was born playing it. That was a fascinating thing. And as he was playing it, he was going, and he had such a great sense of humor. He was saying, oh, the aliens are coming, picking up on my Alien book. And I got a spark. I said, okay, this is the moment. I went out the studio, went back to my word processor, started typing up lyrics for the song, starting with, oh, the aliens are coming. And so it was it was part of a collection that Fred and I expanded on called Melodies for Abductees. But I wrote it. I started writing lyrics, and I started handing out the lyrics, printed them out, handed them out to Fred and to Jeff, and they started, working on a song. So they started working the melody. I was next door working on the lyrics. We finally came together. They had the chorus. They had, the reprise, and they set up the mics, and Fred hit record, and we recorded the song together. I sang backup vocals. And so, within the space of like 4 hours, we had written, orchestrated and recorded a song. And then we just, released it. We're going to release it when the book was released, which we did. That coincided with Jeff Buckley's death. So, we spoke to his mother, Mary, and said, look, we did this song. We want to release it. We want to release it for free, and honoring his memory. And she said, yeah, that's great. That's great. So that's basically how I met Jeff. And it was just an amazing experience to work with somebody that talented. I've had a lot of experiences that way, and I've been very fortunate. And I still find, really great, talented people to work on. And hopefully once we find a way out of this collective pandemic, I'll be able to do more work. Right now, I'm going to do more writing. And so at least that's something I can do during lockdown.
I'm in the, I'm like, just what? So Live Oak, Robert Anton Wilson's area.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
about 10 minutes from here. I'm in the Soquel Mountains, kind of by the beach area in the redwood trees.
Yeah, yeah. I remember visiting Bob when he was still living there.
That's crazy. I have some interesting stories about him, actually. So he died in 2007, and I'd met him a few times because he'd done some things, reading libraries and stuff. I was 16, 15. Well, so he died in January, but his public memorial was, they did it at the Coconut Grove on February 18th, which is my birthday. So I'm stoked that they did that. And I've always found, there's some kind of weird, the number 23. And I had an East German exchange student growing up who just came over right after the wall came down. And so that story about the German kid who was obsessed with Robert Anton Wilson, it was always interesting how things keep spiraling back around that idea, of discord and even like subgenius, like the fact that they have Bob, like it's Bob, like they don't have to say it's Robert, but it kind of seems like it is. But
yeah, his friends always called him Bob. Well, all hail Eris. So thanks for having me on.
We sure do. It's pretty funny. Well, oh my gosh. I mean, it's crazy. It's weird, really weird. Interesting to meet you. That's but yeah, where are you? Are you in Brazil? Where are you at?
Yes, right outside of Sao Paulo.
That's
Brazil.
Awesome. That's one of my favorite places. I lived in South America, so I used to go. The Croatian community there is actually weirdly large in South America.
Yeah, they have a large Japanese community too.
Oh God, 2 million. Yeah, I got kidnapped in Peru, and I had met in Paraguay this Japanese guy, and he turned out to be in the Yakuza. And so his family got me out of Peru at one point. So I'm pretty tied in with them now as well.
When was that? Like the early 90s? Or?
No, this was 2014, 15. It was like right after I'd left CNN and I was living in Argentina and Chile. But I also put up a video recently for Sao Paulo.
I saw that, like 1943 Sao Paulo. It's really fascinating to watch that.
Sao Paulo, the fastest growing city in the world.
It's similar in the city where I'm in. It's San Jose dos Campos, and that's about like 90 minutes outside Sao Paulo. It's where Embraer, the big aircraft manufacturer, is located. So you get a lot of engineers, a lot of expats come down here. Mm-hmm. But it's small. It's less than 1 million. It's about 600,000 or so. So it's still close to Sao Paulo and close to the beach. And the kids like it here. The schools are nice and it's pretty safe. We don't have like sprawling favelas, thank God. But Rio is
totally different in the suburbs. I mean, Sao Paulo gets a really kind of a danger. People think of it as a dangerous city on one side of the logic, but it's like if you can compare it to like East LA or most parts of the United States, I've always felt much more endangered in the United States than I ever have in South America.
Well, that's it. It's interesting because when you speak to the Brazilians and you mention, I've read about the violence and so, and they say, but that's in these isolated places. But in America, you've got shootings in schools, you've got shootings in shopping malls, and it's like, they have a real point.
Yeah, I mean, we're a lot more diversified in our violence.
You have to understand that this was, in the 60s, and despite the the hippie movement, the counterculture. I mean, anything that was on public television or public network, even local access channels were basically looked at. If you did something astray from the little narrow, reality tunnel that they looked at. It got you into trouble. I remember also, again, this was the anti-war movement. I was a senior in high school, and it was a Catholic high school I went to. So we had a number of the priests and nuns teaching us, who a small group of them were part of the radical Catholic movement, which were the anti-war group. And so a bunch of high school students came to a retreat led by Father, and we were just hanging out. And one night, it was like pretty late, and we had a knock on the door, and the priest is there and say, "Hey, Father, what's going on?" He says, "Kids, I just want you to ask you something. It's very important. Don't ask any questions, but if you're holding, please leave it outside the door or give it to me, and no questions asked, okay?" So holding, yeah, he says, you know, the pot, you got the drugs and stuff. And we're looking at each other. I wish we had some, but no. So he left, and then we woke up the next morning. Everything seems fine, and we were expecting a visit from Sister Mary Elizabeth. Said, "Hey, Father, where's Sister Mary Elizabeth? I thought you said she'd be coming." Oh, well, she got delayed. She was only here for a few minutes. She had to run away from the government office. I said, "What government office?" Oh, the ones where they keep all of the draft cards. She was just doing a little action there. And we said, "Oh, Sister Mary Elizabeth burning draft cards. Damn it, we missed it." And then we looked outside, and there's this black sedan. This is true. I'm not making this. It's a black sedan parked across the street. Two obviously FBI agents with binoculars looking at us, And to this day, I keep, saying I should really just file a Freedom of Information request, see if I'm still on the record.
That would be really fascinating. My God. Well, I mean, that's another aspect. I mean, even looking at Discord, the Jesuit connection is so huge, and I've been noticing over and over again, every step along the way all my life, the Teilhard Chardinian quality of the the ECHO program, the CIA's involvement, where they get the idea to wear black, so this whole concept of their interaction and their kind of a spiritual agenda that's connected to a political agenda, liberation theology in South America, Romero, the Jesuit Pope now, moving children, foundlings, they're all of the programs that they have. And then, their interaction with the United States border, and especially the fact that they're surrounded with these kids that are probably otherwise kind of innocent. I mean, they were just trying to make sure you didn't have pot, it sounds like, to make sure that the FBI didn't. Yeah, because they were doing some heavy stuff. And that's not the thing a kid would be thinking. So that's kind of interesting.
No, it's interesting to think about how the Jesuits, haven't been, taken out. I don't want to sound conspiratorial, but I think it's just because their numbers are so large and they've been around for so long. Because if you go to the Vatican, which I haven't been, but so I'm told, and people who visited there told me that you go to the Pope and he's surrounded. This is the previous Pope, surrounded by this old guard, and they're the ones that wield the power. They're like the deep state of the Catholic religion.
Right.
So
right.
They keep all of the. And I love that story. Who was it that wrote the story? It wasn't Thomas Pynchon, but it was a story about some people who were trying to break into the Vatican to to steal the real body of Christ, because he never rose, And I can't remember who wrote that, but it's before she's in the 70s. I'm thinking Pynchon. I'm thinking, let's see. The guy that wrote even Cowgirls Get the Blues.
Tom Robbins, maybe.
Yeah, that's it.
Their technology infrastructure is really deep. People kind of hide Catholicism because they think Christianity is this idea that's very simple to the point of not making sense, but the Jesuits take it to a very scientific level. Right. And let's go back around a bit and talk about your life a little bit more. So you started out in New Jersey, and then how did you get into media and the Jim Henson and all that stuff?
Well, it started when we got my family got its first television. Okay, I was totally fascinated with that, and I wanted to see what was happening. I tried to open the back of the TV to see what was going on, and my parents, stopped me before I electrocuted myself. But into comic books, of course, and writing, into science fiction, writing a lot of science fiction stories. I did storyboards of different stories, and And eventually, as I got older, I borrowed my father's 8mm camera, started doing films with my neighborhood buddies, and started to get into theatrical performances in high school because they really didn't have a, this was too early before the camcorder, industry came about. But in college, I got to work in their TV studio and used a Portaback, which is a huge bulky thing with half-inch reel-to-reel black and white video. I was like one of the first people to take it out in the field and actually do something with it. And then went to graduate school in New York at Columbia University and majored in film production. And then while I was there, I got a call while I was working at the dean's office at the School of the Arts. I got a call from Jim Henson's secretary. And they said, we're looking for someone to be a PA, production assistant. Do you know any students who might be interested? I said, yes, I know someone. I'll send him right down. And I went down the subway and I got, interviewed and I took the job.
He's great. You just told him he's the best student the best TA we've ever had.
Yes, I, gave him a glowing recommendation. So I got to work with such talented people, especially people, not just Jim, of course, who was a genius, but people in the workshop who made the puppets. So I built their first in-house video studio so we could videotape the puppets being made, because at that time they were doing the Muppet Show in London and there was a restriction on how many employees they could bring over from New York. So we'd videotape the puppets being made. We'd ship the tape over by Courier Express. This is way before streaming. And Jim would look at it and said, yeah, we like this, but move the eyes closer together or whatever. And did that for a few years. And then after graduate school, I worked on the Muppets for another year, and then left to start my own production company. This is around 1979. And then did that as a living for a business, commercials, music videos, etc. Did a lot of music videos, a lot of the independent bands in the East Village in New York. We worked with Jim Carroll and Lou Reed and a lot of Man Parrish, a lot of other independent groups.
Yeah, you knew Jim Carroll like really early on before he. Yeah, so that's always been a weird story to me. Is there anything weird behind that, or did it just?
He was a poet, which was really
he's like a really nice guy, and really clever.
He's terribly clever, and he had hired us to do his first music video, which was a Lou Reed cover, "Sweet Jane." But there's nothing really strange about that incident. Came over except when we started filming Lou Reed segments. Lou Reed, of course, had a reputation that preceded him as being cantankerous, right? So just as we were ready to get the first shot in the scene film, Lou said to us, I worked with music video directors, and my idea of heaven is to see each music video director in hell. And it's okay, Mr. Reed, you ready for your first shot?
Oh my God!
So I want to line them up against the wall and shoot them. That was his way of ingratiating himself. But no, he liked it. Everything turned out fine, and then continued on that. That's when we started doing. My production company started doing documentaries and financing our own documentaries. So myself and my partner worked on these documentaries together because we had the equipment. And because we had the equipment, I wanted to, it was a great excuse, a great entree, if you will, to meet the people I wanted to meet. I read John Lilly's books since high school, so I wanted to meet him. So I found a way to reach him. I said, we want to, videotape you for a PBS show, because at that point we already had a documentary that aired on public broadcasting. When can we arrange? We arranged the meeting, and so he walked in with Lady Lisa Lyons, who was one of his adopted adult children, and he came in looking like he'd been up all night, because he had on ketamine, and the interview was just mind-blowing, because I was like very prepared. I'm still very prepared about everything. had a whole list of questions. After the answer to the first two questions, I had to throw the questions away and I had to follow what his train of thought was, which was all over the place. And to me, I couldn't reconcile the writing of this man with the man himself and the way his thought processes actually worked. So I thought the whole thing was ruined. We would never have a documentary, but I finally, rolled up my sleeves and started to put on index cards each of the topics, or the main points of his answers, and laid them on the floor for on the floor for at least 3 or 4 days. So I got them in the order where I had thematic connections between my questions and his answers, and then interspersed that with interviews with other people, professors at MIT and a Native American Indian, and put them together so that following his train of thought gave me the backbone, the spine for the documentary, which was completely 180 degrees from what I originally thought it would be. But it turned out.
Oh, that's also, you have it's Michio Kaku, right? Like,
Michio Kaku was in Borders. He was in the other documentary.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it was great because that was just like our second or third documentary that I produced and directed and won an Emmy. So
it's incredible. One of my favorite things I've ever seen. I'm so glad that it existed and that it could be found.
One funny story about Lilly. So we got to visit him. We made a trip to California, and then we got to know his other adopted daughter, who showed us a videotape of John Lilly meeting Albert Hoffman in Albert Hoffman's Swiss chalet. Okay, and again, these guys were like in their late 80s, right? So they were sitting down and talking, and they were talking. Albert Hoffman says, "I read your work. I read that you do ketamine." And John Lilly says, yes, I did ketamine. He says, and Albert Hoffman, "Tell me about that experience." "Well, I can tell you about the ketamine I took last night." And if you didn't know that these were the two most preeminent scientific minds of their generation, we think there's a couple old junkies getting together to talk, because Albert Hoffman, Lilly asked him about LSD, and I was just, Lilly said, "Do you still take LSD?" He says, yes, I do, but I only take it when I have a certain question to ask to my subconscious." So it was just a really funny and fascinating video to watch, and it exists somewhere. I don't have to find out where it is.
Yeah, I'd love to see that too. I mean, they're like the minds of the phanerothymics. So through Robert Anton Wilson was Valerie, who was working at WHAM. She had done the Women in Medical for Marijuana thing. She helped administer with Laura the LSD injection to Aldous Huxley on his deathbed, and was there for that. And it was interesting because that was an Albert Hoffman synthesis that they had been keeping at UCSD at World Savings. And so World Savings was a bank that we had in the middle of town, and they had all these vaults. And so some of the people were, keeping chemicals there, included Tom Lear, the metaphysicist to the Manhattan Project, is now
just
where
a quick interruption. You mentioned the Manhattan Project. It just so happens that my parents, both parents, father and mother, worked in Oak Ridge, Tennessee on the Manhattan Project. But my father was an electrical engineer, and my mother worked as a secretary heading up the assistant's office. But they never knew, until the day after Hiroshima, exactly what the project was. It was so secretly. So they told me that they saw the newspaper about how many people died in Hiroshima, and they both cried when they read it, because they realized that they were part of this.
They had become death destroyer of worlds. Yes. Oh my God.
And because they're Roman Catholic, Italian heritage and such.
That's weird. Okay, so I would find a Discord link also there. The Harris link with My grandfather worked for Lockheed and was involved with a number of these things and knew Werner von Braun. Do you think that somehow you're predisposed to, writing the alien abductee handbook and meeting John C. Lilly? Do you think why is it that your energy is around that kind of energy and other people like it?
When I spoke to my mother about this, she says, "Oh, you gave me such trouble when I was pregnant with you. I was sick for days, and I was reading all of these movie magazines," she said. So that was her explanation. But I think it really was their experience at Oak Ridge, because even though they didn't speak about it when I was young, I did take them down to Oak Ridge, Tennessee, to revisit them. I videotaped them. We visited the place where they used to live, and we visited the actual facility, and we got an official guide to take us through. And I could see like all the memories coming back to them. And this is something that if your parents have that type of shared history, as a child you pick up on it. But even though they don't talk about it, you pick up on it.
Yeah, the ambience of the information's around you. There's been a number of stories about kids who've, like living around their anthropologist parents, and the parents didn't understand Mayan glyphs, but they were learning about Mayan glyphs. And then the kid by 5 or 6 years old, just because as a baby being there, figured out, it was able to interpret the glyphs. And now, do you think anything about Madrigora? What do you think about those kids who saw things in caves? Do you think seeing things and apparitions and any of that?
Well, I mean, I looked at it from a political view because I was writing this book about a politician, and the director who directed the film about that place was Yakov Sedlar. And the story goes in political circles that it was because that they were about to close the Catholic mission that was headquartered there, and they needed something to revive it and to make sure that it wasn't going to be closed. And that's the extent of my knowledge about it.
I think sometimes propagandists can be onto something. It might be that there's like the alien handbook kind of idea, that there's a spiritual, it might not be exactly the way like the burnt Jesus in the toast picture might not be, right? But I find that in that time, that kids who avoided being shot and that they hid in a cave, I wouldn't be too surprised if there was some connection there. And I wonder, I guess, back to maybe a more generalized version of that question is, what do you think about Echo? What do you think about John C. Lilly's Earth Coincidence Control Office and SSI, Solid State Intelligence? Do you think that stuff was real, or was he just schizophrenic from all of that?
It's the same thing that Philip K. Dick, hooked into when he wrote that book, when he had that experience. It's the same experience. Now, you could say like John C. Lilly talks about the experience he had when he invited a total hardcore scientist to take a trip in his isolation tank, and the scientist came out and said, and so John said, "Well, how did you like it?" He said, "Yes, I had all of these hallucinations." And John said, "No, they're not hallucinations. Just because you imagine it doesn't mean they're not real. That's just what your logical brain is trying to tell you, because it wants to fit into this consensus reality of which you're a part, which you've been indoctrinated." And the scientist thought about it, says, "Yeah, you're right. We shouldn't, prejudge. We shouldn't make these labels before we actually do the deep enough experiments." So John Lilly went about as far as any human being could have in those psychic spaces, and almost lost it there before coming back. Some people say he did lose part of himself there, but maybe he gained some other part of self that he took out of it. I don't know. I've never been. I have been in the isolation tank, but I've never been brave enough to take the dose of LSD while in there.
Yeah, I mean,
maybe on my deathbed, that's what will happen. I'll ask you to come and inject me.
Don't threaten me with a good time.
No,
But
I'm ready.
I'll tell you what. The thing is, it can be a little scary. So I imagine that throwing in the fact that you're going to die with it would be a little much. You know, I mean, a lot of the time it's better to have the harmlessness. I think George Harrison on the Dick Cavett show had talked once about how when they first did LSD, their dentist gave it to him in a beer and didn't tell him what it was, and they had such a great time because there was no placebo, or I mean, well, the only placebo was that they were going to have a great time. So it wasn't anything like, 10 years after by the 70s, everyone's freaking out because they've heard about bad trips, and so there's a place already for what is this? This could be the bad trip I've heard all these warnings about, and so we're creating and manifesting it.
Programming and Deprogramming in the Human Biocomputer, John Lilly's seminal work, which turned me on to him. And, as someone who grew up in the Catholic religion, was an altar boy, and then, realized as I was going to become a teenager that it's, that institutionalized religion was, a big hoax and a big scam. And then, trying, pot for the first time and having my eyes open to the political reality in the late 60s. And, all of the stuff is like, I've got to get into the deprogramming thing. I've got to meet this guy. I got to learn more about it. But something held me back from going, full hog on the LSD. As in high school, just didn't take it. After I graduated in New York, I took something that was sold to me as LSD. I think it might have been speed with a tiny bit of LSD, but the thing that I
could have been PCP. That was very common at that time.
Yeah, I didn't freak out. It was just, mushrooms were fun, but they were exhausting. I hated Coke because I'm already had enough anxiety I had to work through with psychotherapy. And through the years, the best drug I could say I liked was opium. Because in the 70s, when the Iran Revolution happened, there were all the expats coming in. They had to smuggle stuff out. So New York was swamped with opium. And it was I called it like the drug that makes you dream while awake. So waking dreams were fun for me. So when my kids ask me, Daddy, what did you do in the 80s? Talk about that later.
At least it wasn't crack, I guess. I mean,
oh, God, no. Yeah. No, please. No, it's crazy.
Another thing I was going to ask you about was your connection with the Slavs, because there's the Croatian thing, the Bosnian thing, because you want to just get into that? Like, how do you do that?
Sure. So this was in 97. This was a couple of years after my divorce from my first wife. And I was really in debt. I really needed to get some sort of type of work happening. And I met a gentleman, a Croatian, who was the cultural attaché to the Croatian embassy in New York City, where I lived. And this gentleman, his name was Yakov Sedlar. He was introduced to me as the guy that was representing the new government country of Croatia, first independent country of Croatia, founded by the first independent president of Croatia, a guy named Franjo Tuđman. And so Yakov came to me because he was referred to me as I was a person that did video, et cetera, instead. And he had asked me to help work on a documentary that he was doing about Croatia. They wanted to bring in the tourist trade, and they needed to have somebody help do animation. So I did some animation work for it, the film. And that went well. And he came back to me and asked me to do work on a second documentary film. This was about Franjo Tuđman, the president of Croatia. So he gave me the script to read. I looked it over and I corrected some grammar. It was mostly narration with some interviews. And I stopped. I said, we're at this point here where you talk about how the president, Franjo Tuđman, wrote a book. And in the book, it described how the Jews in the concentration camps in Croatia during the Second World War, that a number of them helped to run the camps. I said, you might want to, change the language there, because if you're going to screen the film in the United States, or especially in New York, places like that, you may get some blowback. Very interesting, as if he'd never heard about that. So that was kind of strange, but later on, a few months later, I think it was, he brought a VHS copy of the film. It was called Franjo Tuđman, Croatia's George Washington. This was kind of a hyperbolic way to describe him. But anyway, so I turn on, the film was starting watching it, and then it goes through the opening credits, and it says, directed by Yakov Sedlar and Joe Tripician. I said, I just did a little work on the script. Why is he putting my name as a director? And I mean, not that I don't like the credit, but I usually, to have a credit like that, I actually would have liked to have worked on the film. Then a few months after that, he comes back and says, Joe, I hear you're an author. I said, well, yeah, I wrote this book about alien abductions. He says, yes, I hear you're a great author, and that we want you to do a next job, very important book. We want you to write the official biography of Franjo Tuđman. I said, why are you asking me? Because I'm an American. He says, yes, that's because you're an American. We want an American viewpoint. And I figured this was part of their campaign to raise tourism in, et cetera. But I honestly didn't know much about Tuđman, let alone Croatia. So I said, let me think about it, okay? So I took some time over the weekend to research Tuđman. I found that it's a very controversial figure. He was admired as the hero and the savior of the Croatian state by the nationalists. Some of the extreme nationalists are more fervid supporters of Tuđman, but he's also had been criticized both locally and internationally as an unindicted war criminal. There's talk about how he helped establish the concentration camps in Bosnia, the Croatian concentration camps. And some people had called him the Croatia's Idi Amin. So there was extremes on both sides. It was interesting, fascinating. I didn't really want to get involved in that, and because as I told Yakov when I met him on that Monday after the weekend, I said, I think you should really hire a PR firm in New York. There's lots to choose from, because if you want an official glowing book about this guy, I'm not the guy. I can't do it. And even if I could, I wouldn't, because I wouldn't want to be seen as a propagandist. He says, no, Joe, we insist. He was very insistent. I said, look, the only way I would, do this is if I had the total editorial control. I know that's not going to be what you want. He says, yes, we give it to you. I said, hold on. Are you sure you know what you're saying? Because if you give that to me, I could be critical. Oh, no, Joe, I give you lots of material. You read, you see what a great man he is. And we give you $40,000 up front. I say, when do I go? So that was the beginning of my journey, and it was interesting. And that was just the start of it. So
that blows my mind. I mean, Croatia has we have a spotted history. Obviously, we've been in a war for 1,000 years. There's less of us than the Jews. I'm Croatian Bosnian. I have Bosnia-Herzegovina family. I would say Herzegovina. I've got more family than in the Bosnian part of Bosnia-Herzegovina. But we do. I mean, it's a small region, and there's less of us than there are. There's less of us than there are Jews. They should worry about Croatians more. I would say, but like we're smart, and we've got our own. We do a lot of tech, and we do a lot of programming, and we're involved in a lot of weird things. But at the same time, there is a history there of 1,000 years of disputes, of wars, of pillaging. Of the Turks and the Bosnians have been fighting forever. Yeah. But looking at our history of with the Serbian conflict under Tuđman, I mean, you can't deny that we have a Ustashi history, and that our anti-Sovietism. We've been genocided. We've had people who have been murdered. We'd had people were having all their jobs taken by Serbians. They built the train in from Belgrade to just murder people. I have uncles that were murdered, and I knew kids when I was girls that came to America that had bullets that were lodged in their bones that they could never get removed. A lot of shrapnel wounds and things. And there's a lot of trauma there, but at the same time, you couldn't pretend that we were innocent the entire time either. Like we were in a war, so there were war atrocities committed. We didn't blow up as many bridges or churches or mosques or synagogues as the Serbians, or we kind of are better in line with the Armenians than the other sides. You could give us a lot of credit, don't get me wrong, and that's a bias as a Croatian. So
but it's true, because I mean, when you come down to it, it's really a war of attrition. If you're talking about the Balkan wars of the 90s, I mean, we can go back, of course, to the beginning of the First World War, but what it comes down to is that opportunity, the lack of opportunity, or the greatness of opportunity depends. It really is proportional to the amount of war crimes that each side committed. Okay, when Slovenia and then Croatia declared independence in the early 90s, basically what happened is that Serbia controlled the Yugoslav army, the JNA. So they had all the weapons, they had all the machineries, they had the garrisons, okay? And so they incited the Serb minorities living inside Croatia to riot, okay? And so one, skirmish, one fight turns into a shooting, turns into a massacre, and then it becomes a war of attrition. It's like, okay, you kill my neighbors, I burn your village. You burn your village, I massacre your population, and put them in concentration camps, and just evolve from there. And the natural alliance would be, though, I got the sense from some people I spoke to, is they thought the natural alliance was, at least between President Tudjman and President Milosevic, would be between those two countries. But tell me what your thoughts are on that.
Oh, I mean, like in general, the United States interaction left any country that was okay. So first world, third world is a big issue here. I don't think a lot of people in my younger generation understand what that means, because they saw Titanic, so they think that it's the third row of the boat and it's third class, and it has to do with developing countries. And what's the opposite of a developing country? A stagnating country. It doesn't. The terms are wrong. But this idea of Tito, who was a Croatian, who just said, okay, let's try not to be Soviet, because the Soviets were saying World One is stagnating. 2.0 will be the Soviet Union. And then Tito said, you know what, let's have option C. Let's have an alternative to this idea. And we'll have American denim and rock and roll, and we'll have socialist dentistry. We'll figure out a way. And so Croatia
and passports to travel outside.
That was a huge thing, is having certain amounts of freedom, of mobility, and showing that it could work and that people would want to come back because they love their home. I mean, Croatia was a big push for that, but it took a military maneuver to do this, and at the same time, Yugoslavia was where James Bond was meeting. This is the Fleming area for casinos. This is where mafia and boatsmen and any of the systems that were making the world function during war had to happen. So it was a very important place to the Americans, to the CIA, and they were very worried about losing it. So they had to continually feed into it, but they could never openly say that they were going to do that, so there was never a protection placed over them. And the Serbians were told, hey, we'll give you Kalashnikovs, the Soviet Union said. So it made a lot of sense to them. And all they had to do was to take over the west coast of this really small country, which is arguably culturally similar enough to them, they thought. Right next to Italy.
Slovenia was really close to a nuclear power plant. So they were worried about, a meltdown there. But at the end of the day, you have to understand both the political and the economic aspects to this. One was this was just after the first Iraq War. The United States was still mopping up from that. They didn't want to get into another international, military operation, and so they, sent Jim Baker, the Secretary of State, over there and said, "Oh, look, just like slap the Slovenes on the cheek, and this, they'll fall in line." But they didn't. There was a especially within Croatian, the nationalists particularly, but Croatia, you have to understand that when Tito died, it all fell apart because he was the only political master that could juggle this non-aligned policy between Soviets and the Americans, right? He was the one to keep them both in balance and keep, taking resources from them. So without pledging full, allegiance to either entity. But in this region, he had such political control that he suppressed the individual national identities of, the Bosnians and of the Serbians and of the Croatians, to the extent because he wanted to have brotherhood and unity, the great Yugoslav slogan, as their, official communist motto. But at the end of the day, it was a country where the losses were socialized and the profits were nationalized. Because again, you look at what Croatia had access to. They had access to the coast, the Dalmatian coast, the big tourist trade, which is bringing in a lot of the revenue. Some would say most of the revenue. Okay, and they, when Tito died, all of these, ancient resentments. I'm not going to call them rivalries, but I'm not going to call them ancient historical rivalries, but there were resentments due to the fact of what Tito's suppression tactics were. Okay, and you've got that island out, the naked island out in the coastline, off the coast of Croatia, where they were keeping all the Croatian dissidents because there was a Croatian independence movement, which then harkens back to the NDH, which goes back to the Ustasha, et cetera, et cetera. But those were the political and economic conditions under which the Balkan Wars of the 90s erupted.
Right, and the culture that was emerging from Yugoslavia at that time also was this kind of futurist culture. Their interest in synthesizers and robotics and the technology and automation, like the Czechoslovakian state, they were very interested in progress and labor automation. And that was going to change a lot because they weren't going to have to rely on the workers, which was a huge concept in, Soviet Marxism. So it didn't make any sense to, the idea to a Yugoslavian was to automate and sustain growth, or to, once growth was achieved, to sustain the rate of production and the lack of entropy. And so these were concepts that were very Western and that were very capitalistic, and they were not in line with the Soviet concepts. So when the Serbians started to be bribed better than the Croatians were being bribed by the CIA, that it was almost an inevitable trigger. And the acid, because if you've seen the LSD that was being introduced to the Czech Republic and to Yugoslavia by the CIA and the Soviet Union, who were both working on reverse engineering it, that was a huge issue. I mean, the two wild and crazy guys thing where that's because they were all these expats that they opened the borders and they said, get the hell out, like leave, because the tanks are coming from Moscow on trains, and if you're still here and you still have bright colored auras, we're going to get you. So like leave. And then so many ended up leaving, and that changed things because they couldn't get to the United States. They would go to Croatia. So Croatia became a kind of a psychedelic Slavic state in a lot of ways. I really think that that's a big thing. If you look at the Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia.
Yeah. I mean, it's too bad that they lost it, at the start of the war. But that's that was a political movement. I mean, you look at all the leaders. Okay, you have Milosevic, you have Tudjman, you have Izetbegovic. Go back to their histories. These are all former communists. Then all of a sudden, overnight, turned nationalists. Okay, so you would say that Tudjman's vision, to start from his point of view, started back at the independent Croatian movement, the NDH, all right, which saw parts of Bosnia and Herzegovina as ancient Croatian lands. Okay, so now we get into territorial disputes, right? This is what it is all about. It was a power grab for Tudjman to realize his ancient dream, and he saw that they had more in common. This is many people told me this, including Richard Holbrooke, that he had more in common with Milosevic than he did with any Muslim. So that's just one perspective that you could look at.
I think that like Tudjman's not as bad as like Milosevic.
Oh, of course.
Milosevic had a lot of issues, so I can see why that they would want you to do a. By the way, because I don't think we ever said this, the project you're working on, we're gonna have to start back around because we did kind of start a conversation.
Yeah, we just
here.
dumped in.
I don't think we ever told anybody who we were. Really, we're just like, yeah, okay. Well, so Joe Tripp's working on this thing, and it's called "I Was a Paid Propagandist for Croatia." Is that it?
The documentary, yeah. And it's based on my book, which is a published memoir called "Balkanized at Sunrise," and that the memoir is what happened when I got there to write this book, and all of the political intrigue. I was being followed by the CIA. I was being tracked by other groups, and I wanted to go incognito, but word got out probably before I landed that I was there. And what happened was that for some people, I became known as, oh, you're the paid propagandist. You're the enemy of the of liberty, of the people who want freedom from this oppressive state, as well as, oh, you're the American coming here to do this this glowing book about Tudjman. But really, are you going to say anything bad about him? You watch out. We can't trust this guy. So I was in a no-win situation, and it also includes a lot of the failed romantic encounters I had with Croatian and Bosnian women. So the documentary, is we were going to start shooting it in March. Of course, the pandemic ended that. So we're now just in a pause pattern like so many other productions. But the book is available. It's out there on Amazon. You can get the Kindle or paperback as a shameless plug. But it was just an incredible experience that altered my consciousness in the way that other events have done through my life.
There's a lot of weird.
Yeah, meeting John Lilly was another one. That's.
Yeah, I was gonna spiral back around because we mentioned a few of these things. You've met John Lilly. John C. Lilly was did the Echo Dolphin projects with ketamine and LSD. You did a great documentary on that, which is actually one of the reasons I was reaching out to you. Is the Metaphoria. I recommend people look into that, and maybe at some point, if it's a possible, I'll put like a clip or a small little piece of it or something like that.
Put the trailer on, yeah,
a trailer for some people to find.
I'll send you the link to where it's available on DVD.
Great. Well, there's some of these like Aldous Huxley referred to before they invented the word psychedelic. They used to call them acute schizophrenics. This is a thing that schizophrenic for a while, but then they were looking for a new word, and the governor of Alabama's grandson, Aldous Huxley's friend, what's his name, Osley. Augustus Osley the Bear. He's the third. He's well placed with his political family. They were arguing over the name, and he came up with psychedelic. But Aldous Huxley wanted to call it phenerothine, and so phenerothine.
Huxley was also at Lilly. Were also part of the groups that scientists said, no, this should only be done in the scientific setting. This is a therapeutic drug, because they were, Tim Leary, even though John and Tim were friends. They really disagreed strongly about this point, where Tim was saying, no, get it out, let's liberate everybody right away, But I could see, both sides. I can see both points being made.
That's kind of what Ken Kesey comes along, and they do they've taken the Menlo Park Veterans Hospital, and they're like, okay, maybe people sitting in a white room isn't the right way to go about this because it's a sensory deprivation experience in a lot of ways. Yeah. So they're like, let's put them in a bus and follow them around the country. And that's an interesting Freedom of Information Act read, is how they're following them. I'd love to see people try to look into how they're doing that now with kids.
Well, they're open, as you know, they're opening that up now into therapeutic sessions for people with PSTD, and because the early scientific experiments they're done with hardcore alcoholics, which had, the lowest recidivism rate of any treatment at all. And here I'm proselytizing LSD, even though I haven't really tried it.
There are a lot of problems. I've seen people go pretty crazy from taking, psychedelic drugs, but you can also see the benefit in people are using them in the correct circumstances and microdosing. I loved your answer on cocaine because it's literally the same thing for me, like anxiety and psychoprocessing, way busier.
Yeah, and the people you have to hang out with, it's like, okay, we're going to have a big plan. We're going to do this.
I'm glad you survived the 80s. I can't even imagine.
It's like you have a coke free as a president, allegedly.
Allegedly.
So we don't need it.
It could be on some research amphetamine cathinones. The Soviets have cathinones, which are like the amphetamines. And there's also the tryptamine. But those are the ones that are usually the most beneficial for you, but they're also open source. So there's no patent on them. So pharmaceutical companies can't make money.
That's why not taking them, yes.
Yeah, almost never, yeah. It's a bummer.
Funny story about Robert Anton Wilson. Met him several times. One of the last visits when he made to New York, he was invited to go to this party, and the party was to test out these different psychotropic headgears, eyeglasses that had strobe light effects on it and such, and people were saying, okay, try this on, Bob, try this on, Bob. And Bob was there, and he was drinking, and he was smoking pot, and he had these glasses on. What do you think about that one? He said, honestly, I'm on so many different things right now, I can't tell you.
That's a pretty real answer. So Robert Anton Wilson, is that what we've gotten to? How did you meet Robert Anton Wilson?
I had a friend who was a radio host at a radio station in New York, WBAI, who did an interview with him, and he was the second person on my list I always wanted to meet. So I got a chance to meet him and do an interview with him. I wanted to build a whole documentary around the topic of borders, because he talks about reality tunnels, and it also talks about Chapel Perilous, crossing the border. So we thought it was a natural thing to do, and then we brought on some other people to interview, like Michio Kaku, as you mentioned, and then also had a little dramatic segment with Steve Buscemi.
How young was Michio Kaku though? Because he looks like he's like 20 in that. It's crazy.
No, he was like in his 30s, late 30s, I think.
Oh, okay.
But he was right on the money. We're talking about the Star Wars, the Reagan Star Wars program. He had his own show at WBAI, so we got the introduction to him there as well. But it's good to have friends. And it's funny because the guy that introduced me to them, who had the radio show at BAI, later on turned to be working for the Trump campaign and turned into be a MAGA enthusiast. Although I'm not sure, I'm not going to reveal this in the documentary when I get to interview him in person again. How much there are people who are hardcore, Trump loyalists you can see them now in the cabinet. And there are people who are out there grifters for the money, like Kellyanne Conway. So I think my friend is more or less in the latter category, although he does approve of Trump's China policy. And look at that, because Robert Anton Wilson said several times that he had a large following of not independents, but the libertarians, because he was for the individual liberties, and at that time, in the 80s, there was a lot of repression on repression of pornography and drug use, etc. And but who knew the libertarians would turn out to be, what they are today, which I call, I have friends who are libertarians, and I just say this jokingly, but they're a threat to the United States.
South Park's a libertarian. The Trey Parker.
Libertarians, but I mean, they're like true. I guess you can say there are found different strains of libertarianism. I don't want to make enemies, but because I love everybody. But there are like the foundationists, the people who followed Robert Anton Wilson. It's just the true Marxists, the Groucho Marxists. I wouldn't want to be a member of any party that would have me as a member. And then there are the ones who were like the Elon Musks, who are just basically ones who are building their own bunkers, or who want to go, like, Bezos, who want to go off planet because they see this historic event coming that they're not going to be able to survive. And if you know about Douglas Rushkoff and his encounter with the 5 billionaires, Doug Rushkoff, I recommend you read his stuff, for people listening, watching, to read it. He was called on to give a sort of a lecture presentation to a private group, and he gets called on this, for many different purposes. Usually they're investors who want to know what's the next big thing, because he's known as a futurist. What's the next big thing I should invest in? But he was surprised when there wasn't a large group with like these 5 billionaires, so who couldn't mention the name because he's under non-disclosure, but you can just imagine who they were. And they asked him, okay, what's the next big thing? What we should invest in, blah, blah, blah. And they got to their real question. It's like, okay, how do we keep control of our security force after the event? He says, the event? What do you mean the event? Well, after, the global crisis, after, the pitchfork mobs come after us, after they collapse the economy and the dollars and the currencies are not worth anything, after the event. We want to make sure that the people who work for us will still be loyal to us when we can't pay them with currency that isn't, worthless. And he said, well, maybe you could treat them and their families better. It's not, and about the future, you have some control about how the future will turn out, right? No, they don't want the responsibility.
You have some say. I don't know if you have too much control. We have very little control anymore, it seems like. But I do think that Discord is making it possible. If you look at all the 80s sci-fi shows ever, the doppelganger universe is always the more fascistic universe. So this is the Back to the Future universe, as close as we've ever come with Biff. It's literally Biff. We have
It was modeled after Trump. Biff was modeled after Trump.
Reality is modeled after Back to the Future, modeling after. So it's a meme magic manifestation. So we kind of have to be careful which reality that we're projecting and what we want it to be.
Well, like Larry said, to find the others. Okay, find the others. Talk to each other. Help each other. I really think that's the reason we're on the planet, is to help each other. Okay, you look at the ancient Middle East region, where all the ancient religions started from, and you read about Terence McKenna, how the real ancient religions were the ones that were grouped. There were ones that were more social involved, and ones that shared things, and the ones that took ayahuasca type drugs, and it wasn't until they instituted religion and instituted the priesthood that had to be mediated. So you could speak to your God. You couldn't speak to your God directly. You had to speak to the intermediary. We can get back to those roots. The communal roots is what Doug Rushkoff called Team Human, where we're a part of the resistance against not any political party, not any political regime, but against Echo. Right? What against the Silicon demon? And we are the ones who refuse to go totally binary. We're the ones that live in the analog, and the analog is where creativity and life occurs and where life begins.
It's absolutely beautiful.
Let's end it there. I don't think I'm going to get any better than that right now.